At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a woman who has made veterans issues a top priority since she took office. She's completely committed to helping ensure that the state of Wisconsin does all it can to help our nation's heroes. Please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Governor Kleefisch.
The Bible promises us in Romans 5:3 that not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings. For suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint. George, I wouldn't be born for 5 more years when your friend, specialist, Eddie Messer, died. But I can tell you that I am very sorry for his loss. Vietnam veterans and friends, I can also tell you that I am sorry for your reception when you returned home. And I can tell you today that we are so glad to say welcome home. You have endured sufferings, not only in combat, not only in the loss of your friends, but also when you return and the alienation you felt in the sworn instead of ticker tape parades. But your perseverance and the character you build through it, in it holds the promise of a nation and a generation of moms and dads like me who are committed to raising our children to understand that when they meet a Vietnam veteran, they say thank you. Because that's how we feel. Deep gratitude for your heroism, for your valor. Deep admiration for your bravery and what you have done to protect the freedom of a great nation. We and our children say thank you to you today. Hope does not disappoint, just as your service is something proud not only for Wisconsin, but America. Your service is a beacon for my generation, for my children, and generations more. Perhaps America's most famous general said this: "The willingness with which our young people are likely to serve in any war, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional to how they perceive the veterans of earlier wars were treated and appreciated by their nation." It was prophetic that great general and our first president, George Washington, said those words. Knowing today how you have suffered and how you today are the beacon to a nation. That is just one of the reasons why in 2012, our great Governor Scott Walker declared it the Year of the Veteran here in the state of Wisconsin. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and veterans, please welcome Wisconsin's Veterans Governor, Scott Walker.
Freedom, endowed by our Creator, defined by our Constitution, but protected each and every day by the men and women who proudly wear the uniform of these United States, and to all those who served before. I've said it times here before, I've said it at this ceremony before, but it's worth repeating. Freedom is because of you here today and all that you represent. On behalf of a grateful state and a grateful nation, we say thank you. Today we honor, as we will again on Monday, all the veterans who've served in all the different wars and conflicts. We're thinking about our own state's history, and as I've talked about in the past, thinking in our case here in Wisconsin, in particular from the Civil War on, World War I, World War II, and Korea, and Vietnam, and Desert Storm, and Desert Shield, now in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and even other places around the world like Kosovo, where we've still had folks from Wisconsin deployed in the last few years. In every case, to all those who have served, and to those who are serving today, and to their families and loved ones, we say thank you. But today, appropriately, and I want to thank Secretary Scopes. I want to thank him overall for his tremendous service and those of his colleagues in the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs. He is a combat veteran who understands the importance for all of our veterans, Vietnam and otherwise, how important it is. But I want to thank Secretary Scopes for saying that this ceremony today should have a special impact on thanking our Vietnam veterans. 165,400 strong from Wisconsin. Many of whom are represented here today. Many others are not with us, but whose lives have touched our lives all across the state of Wisconsin. We say thank you. 1,239 made the ultimate sacrifice. And George, as you so vividly portrayed, those aren't 1,239 names. Those are real people who had real lives, real families, and made real sacrifices. Today, we honor their lives, not so much their deaths, but the lives and the impact they had on so many in this state, in this country, and around the world. Today, as Joe Campbell so appropriately pointed out in the POW MIA ceremony, today we remember all those who served, who were prisoners of war, particularly in Vietnam, for those who were missing in action, and thank God so many of them over time have found their way back home, and so many are still undefined as to where they're at today. To all of them, and to their families, and to their loved ones, and to their colleagues, we honor them and their lives and their sacrifice. And as has been mentioned before, in this state, we have the distinction of having six Wisconsinites whose heroic actions in Vietnam were so recognized that our nation gave them the highest honor possible, the Congressional Medal of Honor. 6 from this state, 4 who are still with us living, 1 who we have the honor of being with today, my friend, your friend, the friend of veterans in this state and in this country, here at Westside. Thank you for your help. To say thank you. Now, Deputy Assistant Secretary Garcia, as did George, gave us wonderful comments, but I want to tell you one thing I thought of in particular when you were speaking was about 10 years ago, almost at this time, a little bit earlier, I think it was in July or August, 10 years ago in 2003, long before I was the governor, we had our first wave of young men and women who were going to Afghanistan at that time. You talked about that connection between the patriots today who are serving in places like Afghanistan and elsewhere around the world, and the connection to our veterans. Remember at that time, we had long before I was governor, we had an opportunity to open up, I was then the head of the Milwaukee County government, so we opened up the Milwaukee County Zoo, and we welcomed the families of service members, particularly the wives and the husbands, the sisters and brothers, the sons and the daughters of men and women who were serving in Afghanistan at that time. We welcomed them to the zoo for free, and then we invited not only their families, but we invited veterans to come and join us. And I remember 2 particular things that tie that connection that you talked about so well. One was someone who came up to me and introduced herself and said, you know, my husband is fighting over in Afghanistan right now. I didn't want to come. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. But my mother-in-law told me it was so important to come here and meet other people who were in the same situation. And so I came reluctantly, and she came up and she brought her kids up and wanted me to meet her. Ironically, the next year she brought her husband with her to the same ceremony, the same event, and said, this is the guy who was missing last year. Thank you for continuing to do this. But right after her, another gentleman came up to me and he said, I want to thank you for doing this as well. You see, I'm a Vietnam veteran. And I'm here today because I didn't get this kind of welcome. I didn't get this kind of appreciation. And I came here today to volunteer to make sure that those men and women who are fighting today in Afghanistan got the kind of welcome that every veteran, no matter what war conflict they're in, deserves. And he said, for me, it was an opportunity to come full circle and to have some closure in my life because I was able to be a part of this and in turn be appreciated for what we did in Vietnam and be appreciated for what others are doing in Afghanistan. And I think you're right. that as we continue to support those men and women who are deployed across the country, we're able to see the honor and the valor and the distinction that came out of those veterans of Vietnam and all the other wars and conflicts. But it's so important to do that and pass it on from one generation to the next. Many of you have talked about the wall, and I was not there in November of 1982 when the wall was first dedicated, but I came a few years later. In 1985, I had the honor for the first time in my life, I was involved in a program the American Legion has called Badger Boy State. I had the honor of going to Washington as one of the two representatives in a program called Boy Station. And as a kid from a small town in Delaware where my dad was a preacher and didn't have a lot of money, we never made it out to Washington or New York or anywhere else like that. And so I was wide-eyed, opened up as I came into our nation's capital. My adult counselor at that time was a guy by the name of Bob Turner, who later, a few years later, was the first national commander of the American Legion who had been a Vietnam veteran. And Bob Turner impressed upon me on what he and others had gone through. And so as we made our trip around our nation's capital, we went to all sorts of places, the Capitol, the White House, the memorials, the Washington, the Lincoln, and others. But as you can imagine, for him, a lot of his colleagues who were part of that staff weren't that many years removed from having fighting themselves in the Vietnam War. Taking us to the wall was really a very moving experience. For Mr. Turner, and for all the rest of us who went with him. You see, it was clear to us that this wasn't just a memorial. It was clear to us, going with Bob Turner and others like him, as we saw people etching with pieces of paper the names of friends and loved ones and colleagues and others on this, that this was very much a living wall. A wall that represented not so much the death, but the memories of those, the lives that had been touched, the impact that people have had, not just in war, but overall their lives. That image has never left me, and over the years I've come back many times. In fact, I think about Gary's, I recognize one of the other names on that wall is Lance Seidel, another Medal of Honor recipient who's just a couple panels over from the center on the right, faced towards the Washington Monument, the POW who was shut down just days after I was born, whose name is in the 128th Mess Hall as recognition of his distinction, of his amazing courage as a prisoner of war and ultimately the ultimate sacrifice he gave. When I think about that wall, though, it is so vivid. I'll leave you with this. It's certainly great to have days like today to say thank you. It's wonderful to have walls and memorials and recognitions, but particularly for not just today's generations of military service members, but for people like my kids and future generations. One of the most important tributes we can make to all of you who served in Vietnam, to all those others who served our country, and particularly to the names who are on that wall, is to remember something that I first noticed that first day in 1985 when we went to the wall, and that is, if you look at the wall on the day when the sun is out, and you see the polished slabs of black granite, one of the most compelling things to me about that wall, about that memorial, is that in addition to seeing the names etched in the memorial wall itself, you can see your own reflection behind the names. The greatest tribute we can give to every one of the people whose names is listed on that wall and all the others who paid that ultimate sacrifice for this great country is to make sure a piece of their life, their fight for freedom, their courage, their distinction, their honor, their valor, that a piece of everything they lived and fought and ultimately died for lives within each and every one of us, just like that reflection on the wall. That's the greatest tribute we can give, not just today, but every day as we go forward. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your service.
Again, Governor.